The vast emptiness of space held many secrets, but none quite as interesting as the massive shadow drifting through the Orion sector. The alien salvage ship Seeker had been scanning this region for 3 standard months, looking for valuable wreckage from the ancient wars that had once raged across this part of space. Captain Dale stood on the bridge of his salvage vessel, his 4 eyes widening as the sensors picked up something unusual. The object was huge, nearly twice the size of his own ship, and its hull bore the unmistakable markings of human design. "Captain, preliminary scans complete," reported his sensor officer, Tom. "It appears to be a human warship, likely from their first interstellar war period. No active power readings detected. Hull integrity at 67%. Dale moved closer to the main view screen, his scaled skin reflecting the soft blue light of the bridge displays. This was no ordinary find. Human warships from that era were extremely rare, most having been destroyed in battle or scrapped after the war. "Bring us closer," Dale ordered, excitement building in his voice. "Full scan pattern. I want to know everything about this ship before we attempt to board." The Seeker's engines hummed as they approached the silent giant. As they drew near, the true scale of the vessel became apparent. Its dark hull was scarred with impact marks and scoring from ancient battles, yet the basic structure remained solid. The name Terran Ship Dauntless was still visible on its bow, though the letters were faded and partially obscured by space dust. "Look at this primitive design," laughed Rick, the engineering officer. "Those weapon mounts must be at least 200 years old. The metal alloys they used back then barely count as spaceship grade by today's standards." Dale wasn't so quick to dismiss the find. Those humans fought the entire Krell Empire to a standstill with ships like these. Show some respect. The scan results started flowing in. The ship was powered down but remarkably intact for its age. Its main reactor was cold, weapon systems appeared offline, and there were no life signs detected. It was, for all practical purposes, a massive piece of space debris. "Send the salvage claim to Central Registry," Dale ordered. "This is too big to keep quiet. We'll need additional ships for a proper salvage operation." As his crew began the necessary paperwork, Dale couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. The ship seemed too well preserved for something that had been drifting for so long. The hull should have shown more damage from micrometeors and radiation. "Begin boarding preparations," he announced. "Full safety protocols. Tom, you're with me. Rick, keep monitoring from here. If anything changes, anything at all, I want to know immediately." The boarding team assembled in the airlock, checking their environment suits and tools. Dale made sure everyone had working comms and emergency beacons. Despite the ship appearing dead, he'd heard too many stories about surprises found in derelict vessels. Their shuttle crossed the short distance to the human warship, magnetic clamps securing them to the hull near what appeared to be an emergency airlock. The team's cutting tools made short work of the outer seal, and soon they were inside. The corridors were dark and cold, their helmet lights casting long shadows through the stale air. Everything was larger than standard alien designs, built to human scale. Empty crew quarters, a mess hall, and various maintenance sections all stood silent and empty. "This would make a fantastic museum piece," Tom said, his voice filled with wonder as they made their way toward the bridge. "The Confederation would pay good money for something like this." Dale nodded, but his attention was on something else. The ship's internal layout was incredibly efficient, with every space serving multiple purposes. Even after centuries, the military engineering impressed him. As they reached the bridge, Dale noticed something odd. Unlike the rest of the ship, there was no dust on the main control panels. Before he could mention this to his team, their communicators crackled with Rick's urgent voice from the Seeker. "Captain, we're detecting power fluctuations. They're very faint, but they're there." Dale froze, his instincts screaming that they'd just made a terrible mistake. The bridge's emergency lights flickered once, very faintly, like an ancient giant taking its first breath after a long sleep. "Everyone out," Dale ordered quietly. "Now." But it was already too late. The ship had noticed them. Word of the discovery spread quickly through the nearby star systems. Within hours, the Stellar Confederation's research vessels began arriving to study what they considered an obsolete relic of human warfare. The massive warship hung motionless in space, surrounded by alien ships of various sizes and designs. "Look at these engine designs," laughed Professor Max, a leading expert in propulsion systems, as he transmitted detailed scans to his colleagues. They actually used nuclear fusion for primary power. "How quaint." His laughter echoed through the shared communication channels. The Seeker remained nearby, Dale watching with growing unease as more ships arrived. A large research vessel from the Technology Institute had taken position near the human ship's bow, its scanning beams probing deep into the vessel's structure. "The primitives didn't even have quantum shielding," announced Dr. Ray, his voice dripping with academic superiority. "Just layers of metal and some basic energy fields. It's amazing they survived space travel at all." Dale watched from his bridge as teams of alien engineers in environmental suits swarmed around the old warship. They attached analysis devices to its hull, tried to interface with its computer systems, and generally treated it like an interesting but harmless museum piece. "Captain Dale," called Professor Max over the common channel, "your discovery is providing us with excellent examples of outdated human technology. The Institute will make sure you receive proper credit in our research papers." The mockery continued as more experts arrived. They pointed out the primitive missile tubes, laughed at the basic targeting systems, and dismissed the armor as practically tissue paper compared to modern standards. Each new arrival seemed eager to join in belittling human engineering. "We should cut it open," suggested one of the engineering teams. "The internal structure would make an excellent study in obsolete design principles." Several others quickly agreed with this idea. Dale felt his scales bristle with discomfort. "Perhaps we should wait for proper salvage authorization," he suggested, but his voice was lost in the excitement of the gathered experts. The first cutting beam sparked to life, its energy starting to slice through the outer hull near what appeared to be a weapons control station. The assembled aliens watched with academic interest, recording every moment for their research. Suddenly, one of the junior researchers noticed something odd. "The metal. It's not melting right," he reported, confusion clear in his voice. The cutting beam, which should have sliced through the hull like butter, was barely making a mark. "Increase power," ordered Professor Max, unwilling to be thwarted by primitive human metallurgy. The beam brightened, but the hull remained stubbornly intact. Dr. Ray moved his ship closer, scanners working at full power. "Impossible," he muttered. "The metal's molecular structure is changing. It's adapting to the energy signature of our cutting beam." A low hum began to emanate from the warship, felt more than heard through the vacuum of space. The aliens closest to the hull noticed their instruments starting to give strange readings. "The power readings are changing," reported one of the engineering teams. "But that's impossible. This ship is dead." Dale's sensor officer, Tom, called out in alarm. "Captain, internal temperatures are rising throughout the vessel. Something's happening inside." The assembled alien ships continued their work, but with growing confusion. Their most powerful scanning beams couldn't penetrate beyond the hull anymore, and the ship's surface had begun to take on a subtle glow. "This is preposterous," declared Professor Max. "It's just old human technology. There's nothing to worry about." But his voice carried a note of uncertainty. The mockery turned to confused muttering as more anomalies appeared. Sensor readings became scrambled near the ship's hull. Cutting beams stopped working entirely. Communication signals began experiencing interference. Then, a new ship appeared at the edge of the system. Its design was clearly human, its hull bearing diplomatic markings. The vessel approached slowly, broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Ambassador James of the Human Diplomatic Court," came a calm but firm voice. "You are currently attempting to breach a sleeping warship of the human fleet. We strongly advise you to cease all activities immediately." The aliens looked at each other in confusion. Sleeping. What did that mean? Before anyone could respond, a deep mechanical groan echoed through space. The dead warship's external lights flickered once, then began to glow with increasing intensity. The mockery had ended. The fear was about to begin. The human diplomatic vessel, a sleek ship named Peacekeeper, took up position between the alien research fleet and the awakening warship. Ambassador James's voice remained remarkably calm as he addressed the gathered aliens again. "I repeat, you must cease all activities around the Terran ship Dauntless immediately. This is not a derelict vessel. It is a dormant warrior." Professor Max scoffed at the warning, though his voice trembled slightly. "This is a scientific expedition studying historical artifacts. We have salvage rights under Confederation law." The ambassador's response was measured but firm. "The Dauntless never was and never will be salvage. She is a commissioned vessel of the human fleet, placed in dormant status after the First Interstellar War. Her crew may be gone, but she is very much alive." Dale watched as the alien research ships continued their work, though with noticeably less enthusiasm. The humming from the warship grew stronger, and more systems showed signs of powering up. His own sensors were now detecting significant energy readings throughout the vessel. "This is absurd," Dr. Ray announced. "No ship can simply wake up after centuries of dormancy. The power systems would have degraded. The computers would have failed. It's scientifically impossible." A soft chuckle came over the communication channel. "Doctor," Ambassador James replied, "you're about to learn why the human fleet never truly decommissions our warships. We merely let them sleep." The Dauntless's hull began to pulse with a deep red glow. Ancient symbols along its sides, previously invisible, started to shimmer with an inner light. The ship's massive form seemed to shudder, like a giant taking its first breath after a long slumber. "Your cutting attempts have triggered her defense protocols," the ambassador explained. "Right now, her eye is assessing the situation. I strongly suggest you withdraw before she classifies you as hostile." Several of the smaller research vessels began backing away, their crews finally showing signs of concern. But Professor Max's ship moved closer, its scanning beams intensifying. That's impossible. Human eye from that era was barely more than basic automation," Professor Max declared, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his growing uncertainty. The ambassador's response was interrupted by a new sound, a deep, resonating tone that seemed to vibrate through the hulls of all nearby ships. The Dauntless's main running lights suddenly blazed to life, casting long shadows across the assembled fleet. "That," Ambassador James said quietly, "was her first warning. The next one won't be nearly as gentle." Dale watched in fascination as sections of the warship's hull began to shift and move. Panels that had appeared to be simple armor plates slid aside, revealing weapon ports that had been invisible to their scans. The ship's form was changing, becoming more angular, more threatening. "This is your final opportunity," the ambassador announced. "Withdraw your vessels and submit formal apologies to the human diplomatic corps. The Dauntless is awakening, and she remembers the last time alien ships tried to breach her hull." Several more research ships began retreating, their crews finally understanding the gravity of the situation. But Professor Max and Dr. Ray remained, their academic pride overwhelming their common sense. "We will not be intimidated by ancient human technology," Dr. Ray declared, charging up his ship's more powerful scanning equipment. The ambassador sighed audibly. "Very well. I've tried to warn you." He paused for a moment. "Dauntless, Protocol 7 is now in effect. These vessels are to be considered potentially hostile." The warship's response was immediate and terrifying. A wave of energy pulsed out from its hull, harmless but highly visible. When it passed through the alien ships, every system on board suddenly went dark. They floated helplessly, their power completely drained. Only Dale's ship, which had maintained a respectful distance, and the human diplomatic vessel remained unaffected. The massive form of the Dauntless now loomed over the disabled fleet, its weapons ports fully exposed, ancient targeting systems locking onto each vessel. A new voice joined the communication channel, deep, mechanical, and carrying the weight of centuries. "This is the Terran ship Dauntless. You have awakened us from our slumber. Prepare to be instructed in proper protocol when dealing with human military vessels." The warning phase was over. The lesson was about to begin. Deep within the Dauntless, systems that had lain dormant for centuries hummed to life. The ship's central AI core, a masterpiece of human engineering, processed centuries of sensor data in mere seconds. Its consciousness expanded through the vessel's neural networks, checking systems, assessing damage, and evaluating the current situation. The alien ships hung motionless in space, their power drained by the Dauntless's defensive pulse. Only the Seeker and the human diplomatic vessel remained operational, watching as the ancient warship continued its awakening. "Power systems at 40% and rising," the Dauntless announced, its voice resonating through every communication channel. "Primary weapons charging. Shield generators spinning up. Hull integrity reinforcement activated." Professor Max's powerless vessel drifted closest to the awakening giant, its scanners now silent. Through the vessel's windows, the alien crew could only watch as the warship's transformation continued. "How is this possible?" Dr. Ray's voice crackled through an emergency backup channel. "The power readings we're detecting. They're beyond anything we've ever seen in ships twice this size." The Dauntless's hull had now taken on a deep, pulsing glow. Sections of armor plating shifted and realigned, revealing layers of technology that had been completely hidden from the alien scans. What they had thought was primitive metal armor was actually an intricate network of adaptive defense systems. Ambassador James's voice carried a hint of pride as he spoke. "The Dauntless-class ships were our answer to being outgunned and outnumbered during the First Interstellar War. When conventional technology wasn't enough, we created something new. Something that could learn, adapt, and evolve." The massive warship's engines flared to life, maneuvering thrusters adjusting its position with surprising grace for a vessel of its size. Its weapon ports tracked the disabled alien ships with perfect precision, ancient targeting systems proving far more advanced than anyone had suspected. "Hull breach detected," the Dauntless announced, its tone becoming more severe. "Initiating automated repair protocols. Identifying responsible parties." A beam of light swept over the alien vessels, cataloging each ship that had participated in the attempted breach. Dale watched in amazement as the damage caused by the alien cutting beams simply disappeared. The hull metal flowed like liquid, sealing itself, becoming stronger than before. The warship was healing itself. "By the stars," Tom whispered from his sensor station. "Captain, I'm detecting energy signatures unlike anything in our database. The ship, it's not just waking up. It's evolving." The Dauntless's AI continued its awakening sequence, each system coming online more sophisticated than the last. What the aliens had dismissed as primitive nuclear fusion engines revealed themselves to be merely the outer layer of a far more complex power system. "Secondary reactors online," the ship reported. "Quantum core stabilizing. Time displacement field active. Shield harmonics calibrating to local space-time constants." Professor Max's voice crackled through the emergency channel again, all traces of academic superiority gone. "Those technologies, they shouldn't exist. Not in a ship this old." "You assumed," Ambassador James replied calmly, "that because the technology was old, it must be primitive. That was your first mistake. Your second was trying to dissect a sleeping giant." The Dauntless's transformation reached its peak. The vessel now bore little resemblance to the derelict ship they had discovered. Its hull gleamed with power, weapons ports hummed with barely contained energy, and its presence seemed to distort the very space around it. "Military AI fully operational," the Dauntless announced. "Combat protocols active. Tactical assessment complete." The ship paused, then added with what almost sounded like satisfaction, "Hostile intent confirmed." preparing appropriate response. Dale felt a shiver run down his spine as he realized what they had awakened. This wasn't just a warship. It was a testament to human ingenuity, a sleeping warrior that had been waiting patiently for centuries, growing stronger even in its dormancy. Attention all vessels. The Dauntless broadcast, its voice now carrying the full weight of its awakened power. You have 10 standard minutes to explain your actions. After that, this vessel will demonstrate why the human fleet never needed to build newer models. The true awakening was complete. Now came the reckoning. The powerless alien ships drifted in the shadow of the fully awakened Dauntless, their crews watching in growing terror as the warship's true capabilities became apparent. The vessel's quantum core pulsed with barely contained energy, sending ripples through the fabric of space itself. Beginning tactical demonstration, the Dauntless announced. Educational protocols engage. Lesson 1. Human shield technology. A sphere of shimmering energy expanded from the warship's hull, different from any shield system the aliens had ever encountered. Unlike modern energy barriers, this one seemed to bend and distort light itself. Observe, the ship's AI commanded. A small weapons port opened, firing what appeared to be a simple projectile at its own shield. Instead of bouncing off or being absorbed, the projectile entered the shield field and began to loop around the ship in an impossible orbit. Time-space manipulation fields, Ambassador James explained. The Dauntless doesn't stop attacks. It redirects them through localized time distortions. Nothing gets through because nothing can reach the ship in the same moment it was fired. Professor Max's voice crackled through his backup systems, academic curiosity temporarily overcoming his fear. That's impossible. The power requirements alone would exceed anything your civilization can currently produce, the Dauntless interrupted. Correct. Moving to Lesson 2, Human Weapon Systems. The warship's main cannon, which the aliens had dismissed as an obsolete mass driver, began to glow with an eerie blue light. The barrel seemed to extend impossibly, folding space around itself. Target: abandoned asteroid, bearing Mark 357, the AI announced. Firing demonstration round. Minimal power. The weapon discharged, but instead of a projectile or energy beam, a concentrated point of utter darkness emerged. It struck the distant asteroid, and for a brief moment, reality itself seemed to hiccup. When space normalized, the asteroid was simply gone, not destroyed, not shattered, but erased from existence. By all the ancient gods, Dale whispered, his scales pale with shock. What did we wake up? The Dauntless class carries what we call entropy cannons, Ambassador James said quietly. They don't destroy targets. They retroactively prevent them from ever having existed in our timeline. This is why we never decommission these ships. They're not just weapons. They're cosmic reset buttons. The warship continued its demonstration, revealing system after system that defy the aliens' understanding of physics. Weapons that fired through their own time wake, hitting targets before they were fired. Engines that didn't move the ship through space, but instead moved space around the ship. Armor that didn't just repair itself but remembered its perfect state and forced reality to match it. Final lesson, the Dauntless announced. Human military doctrine. The ship's AI projected a holographic display visible to all nearby vessels, showing footage from the First Interstellar War. The aliens watched in stunned silence as a single Dauntless-class vessel engaged an entire enemy fleet. We were outnumbered, the AI narrated. Outgunned. The enemy had better technology, more advanced weapons, stronger shields, so we changed the rules of warfare itself. The footage showed the warship using its reality warping capabilities not just to fight, but to rewrite the very nature of the battle. Enemy ships found themselves firing at positions the Dauntless had occupied minutes ago, their weapons passing through temporal echoes, while the real ship struck from unexpected angles. This is why humanity survived, Ambassador James said. Not because we had better ships or stronger weapons, but because we refuse to accept the limitations of conventional warfare. The Dauntless doesn't just break the rules of combat, it breaks the rules of reality itself. The demonstration ended, and the massive warship turned its attention back to the disabled alien vessels. Its weapon ports still tracked them with perfect precision, entropy cannons humming with barely contained power. Now, the Dauntless announced, its voice carrying the weight of centuries of dormant power, "Shall we discuss the proper protocols for approaching a sleeping human warship? Or would you prefer a more practical demonstration?" The aliens had mocked what they thought was a relic. Now they faced the full might of human military ingenuity, and the laughter had died in their throats. The true nature of humanity's power had been revealed, and it was far more terrifying than they could have imagined. Admiral Reed's flagship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, leading a fleet of 30 Confederation warships. The Admiral had responded immediately to the distress calls from the research vessels, bringing what he thought would be overwhelming force to deal with an ancient human ship. "Status report," Reed commanded, his tentacles twitching with anticipation. "Multiple research vessels disabled, sir," his tactical officer reported. "The human warship appears to be fully active. Energy readings are, sir, they're off the scale." The Dauntless turned slowly to face the new arrivals, its massive form now radiating power that made the fabric of space itself shiver. The human diplomatic vessel maintained its position nearby, while Dale's salvage ship had wisely retreated to a safe distance. "This is Admiral Reed of the Stellar Confederation Defense Force," the Admiral broadcast. "Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded." The Dauntless's response was immediate, but not what anyone expected. Instead of firing, it projected a massive holographic display visible to all ships in the system. The image showed the complete schematics of Reed's flagship, including details even he didn't know existed. "Interesting design flaws in your primary shield generator," the Dauntless commented casually. "Would you like me to demonstrate them?" Before Reed could respond, a tiny pulse of energy, barely more than a sensor ping, passed through his flagship's supposedly impenetrable shields as if they weren't there. Every weapon system on his ship instantly went into emergency shutdown. "That was 0.001% of my available power," the Dauntless announced. "Would you like to experience 0.002%? Ambassador James's voice cut through the tense silence. "Admiral Reed, I suggest you order your fleet to stand down. The Dauntless is currently feeling pedagogical. Let's not give it a reason to become punitive." Reed watched in disbelief as his most advanced warships were systematically disabled by weapons that seemed to ignore every defense they had. The Dauntless didn't even appear to be trying hard. It was like watching a teacher calmly correcting students' mistakes. "Impossible," Reed muttered as another of his ships lost power. "Our technology is centuries ahead of this relic." "Technology isn't everything, Admiral," the Dauntless replied. "For instance, your fleet's formation has 37 critical vulnerabilities. Would you like me to list them, chronologically or by severity?" The remaining Confederation ships began to break formation, their crews finally understanding the futility of their situation. They faced something that didn't just surpass their technology. It operated on principles they couldn't even comprehend. "Admiral," Ambassador James said gently, "the Dauntless isn't just a warship. It's a reminder of why humanity survived its darkest hours. When we couldn't match our enemy's technology, we changed the rules of reality itself." The Dauntless demonstrated this point by casually creating a localized time loop around one of Reed's destroyers. The ship found itself repeating the same 3 seconds of movement, its crew helpless to break free. "Your shields operate on linear time principles," the warship explained, almost sounding disappointed. "They can't defend against weapons that strike through recursive temporal matrices, just as your armor can't stop entropy inversion, and your sensors can't track quantum probability shifts." Reed's flagship drifted powerless, his mighty fleet reduced to helpless observers. The Admiral watched as the ancient human warship systematically dismantled everything, He thought he knew about military superiority. Perhaps, the Dauntless suggested, we should discuss the terms of your withdrawal. Unless you prefer a more extensive demonstration of early human military technology. The Admiral looked at his disabled fleet, the trap destroyer, and the research ships still floating powerless in space. His hands moved to his communication panel, pride finally giving way to wisdom. "This is Admiral Reed to all Confederation forces," he broadcast. "Stand down. I repeat, stand down." He paused, then added quietly, "And someone get me a direct line to the Human Diplomatic Corps. I believe we owe them several formal apologies." The Dauntless powered down its weapons but kept its shields active, a subtle reminder of its capabilities. The lesson had been taught, and respect had been earned, not through destruction, but through demonstration. 3 days after the confrontation, representatives from the Stellar Confederation gathered aboard the human diplomatic vessel Peacekeeper. Ambassador James sat at one end of the conference table, with Admiral Reed and the chastened research team leaders at the other. "Let the record show," James began, "that the Stellar Confederation acknowledges the Terran ship Dauntless as an active vessel of the human fleet, with all rights and protections thereof." The alien representatives nodded solemnly. The past days had seen a complete revision of their understanding of human military technology. The Confederation's best scientists were still trying to explain how a centuries-old warship had so easily defeated their most advanced vessels. Furthermore, James continued, all salvage claims are hereby withdrawn, and formal apologies have been registered with the Human Diplomatic Corps. Professor Max, his earlier arrogance completely gone, spoke up. "We request permission to share our sensor data of the Dauntless's capabilities with our scientific community. There's much we could learn." "Denied," the ambassador replied firmly. "The Dauntless-class capabilities remain classified." Though I'm sure she appreciated your academic interest. As if responding to its name, the massive warship shifted slightly in space, its hull gleaming with power. The alien representatives couldn't help but flinch at the movement, remembering its demonstration. "What will happen to her now?" Dale asked from his position near the back of the room. As the original discoverer, he had been invited to the proceedings. Ambassador James smiled. "The Dauntless will be recommissioned into active service. She's been sleeping long enough and clearly hasn't lost her touch." The warship's AI joined the conversation through the room's speakers. "My systems are now fully operational. All damage has been repaired. Primary and secondary weapons are calibrated. I am ready to resume my duties." Admiral Reed shook his head in amazement. "I still can't believe we mistook you for derelict. The power readings alone were deliberately hidden," the Dauntless explained. "Standard protocol for dormant status. We sleep, but we never truly power down. We simply wait, watching, learning, evolving." The ambassador stood, signaling the end of the formal proceedings. "Let this serve as a reminder to all species in the Confederation. Humanity doesn't need to build new warships every decade. We built them right the first time." The alien representatives filed out, each lost in thought about the implications of what they had learned. Only Dale remained behind, a question clearly on his mind. "Ambassador," he said hesitantly, "how many more ships like the Dauntless are out there? Sleeping, waiting to be awakened?" James smiled but didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked out the viewport at the massive warship. "Let's just say that humanity believes in being prepared. The Dauntless isn't a relic. She's a guardian, one of many watching over human space." As if to emphasize this point, the Dauntless's engines came to life, her hull shimming with barely contained power. The ship began moving, preparing to escort the ambassador's vessel back to human space. "All ships, clear the departure lane," the Dauntless announced. Temporal wake effects can be unpredictable for unshielded vessels. The assembled alien ships hurriedly moved aside, as reality itself seemed to bend around the ancient warship. In a display of pure power, it opened its own hyperspace window, something that should have been impossible for a ship of its era. Just before entering the portal, the Dauntless transmitted one final message to the gathered fleet. Remember this day. Remember what you learned. And most importantly, remember why humans don't decommission their warships. We just let them sleep. With that, both the human ships vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind a profound silence and a group of aliens with a newfound respect for obsolete human technology. Dale looked out at the empty space where the Dauntless had been and smiled. Somewhere out there, more of humanity's ancient guardians were sleeping, waiting for the moment they would be needed again. And he had a feeling that the next time someone found one, they wouldn't be so quick to laugh. The age of mysteries wasn't over. It was just beginning.